welcome to another episode of RPG Roundtable. Adam Hawes, the developer of Realms of Antiquity for the TI-4A home computer system. And we also have with us Golden Flame.
I'm Adam Burr, aka Golden Flame, working on Chronicles of Eleusis, The Dark Unknown.
And I'm Mark Lemmert. I am the lead developer of the Nox Archaeist project, an RPG released in 2020.
And I'm Damian, also known as Roundtable, working on a 90s inspired RPG, Call of Sergnar.
Okay, so we have a small list of questions we'll be going over today. Please feel free in the comments if you have any particular questions you want answered to supply them to us. We will consider them for a future recording. So question one is, do you work solo or do you work with a team or possibly with freelancers, maybe for art and music, sound and whatnot? Adam Burr?
I am a solo dev with a day job, which makes for slow progress. I have done as much as possible on my own. I wrote my code and tools. I composed my music. I wrote the plot and the story, designed the systems, wrote the manuals, learned InDesign, had to set up websites, social media. To be honest, it kind of sucks, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Oh, yeah.
But you got to do what you got to do. The things I didn't do were primarily art related. I hired an artist, Indy Martin, to do the art for my manuals. I've hired a series of artists to do in-game art that's ongoing. My sound effects mostly came from the Sonus free bundles that they give away each year at GDC. And also there were some Humble Bundle retro RPG sound effect bundles a couple years ago that I picked up, and that's where a lot of the rest of my sound effects came from. I feel like if you have money to throw at some of these things, then for your own sanity, if you're trying to solo dev it, I recommend that you do so. There's already no chance that my game will ever make back the amount of money that I have put into developing it, and that's fine. It's a labor of love. It's a project that's fun. I'm not doing it to make money. I can afford to do that. Like I said, it's not my day job, so I am at peace with that. And even if you're doing everything solo and can't do that so much, if you have a friend who's an editor, a friend who does, web design or something, accept their help. It will... The first good while of stuff, it was fine. I was doing basically everything on my own, but then as you get closer and you need people to start discovering that your project exists and you need to do a website and you do all this other stuff, it just keeps being like, well, I can work on the actual project or I can do some of this damn busy work that needs to happen, but it's a pain. So that's been my experience with it so far.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I started out with the Nox Archaeist project as a solo dev and kind of evolved into a team as time went on, with ultimately at the end of it more than a dozen people involved, most on a very, very part-time basis, of course. Nox Archaeist is at its core, in my heart, a hobby project due to its fortunate significant popularity, which I'm very grateful for. It has acquired a lot of, sort of the trappings and feel of a commercial project in some ways, because we're producing thousands of box sets literally to be shipping out, as well as other trinkets and books of hints and all those things that just kind of snowballed, etc. Which have all been great fun to do. And so it kind of straddles the line between hobby project and those commercial elements, but still maintaining the hobby aspect of it as the core passion by myself and others. We're not doing it for the money, like Golden Flame said, and this is all about having fun, reliving the 1980s gaming experiences. And that the team evolution came about really in the early days when I was, wearing all the hats, doing everything. I started to look at, what is it that are my strengths? What are the things that I'm, okay at, mediocre at? What are the things that I'm really not good at all, or just flat out don't, even know how to do? And so that really drove the kind of team development process. And for example, one of the very first things that I accepted help on was with art and graphics, because I can do a little bit of programmer art, but nothing that's all that great. And then of course music, that's not my strong suit as well. And I really focused on the programming and the game design. I ended up getting some help with somebody to manage the Kickstarter and design all of the feelies associated with that. And then when it came time to actually deliver on those rewards, it was a teammate of mine that was ordering all the materials and putting together all the box sets and shipping them out and just doing that entire thing. And which was hugely I can't imagine having done that without him, or in terms of the rest of the game, putting it together without my teammates helping on the art and the music and things like that. I did get a little bit of help on the programming side as well. I did the bulk of it, but there were definitely some aspects of Apple II programming that like writing a bootloader, for example, which is how you essentially use all the memory. And Adam, I know you know about this. It's how you use all the memory in the computer by kicking the operating system out and using it all for your game, and running it on the bare metal. And I had written a bootloader to do that, but ended up getting hooked up with somebody in the Apple II community who goes by the hacker alias Cucumba, who rewrote it way better than I ever could have. And as a result, freed up resources and enabled features in the game that would not have otherwise been there. So definitely, even on the programming side, the little bit of help that I got there was definitely impactful. And yeah, that's I guess basically kind of how it evolved, and really happy with the way that it ended up. And working on the expansion and moving forward what we do next. The team is held together, so I anticipate that's the way that we're gonna roll moving forward as well.
Awesome.
Yes, so yeah, my game, I started on it solo. It's still a very small project by a team number of people level, which is basically me, everything except music and sound effects, and the occasional programmer. But yeah, it's I'm thankful I got quite a following on Patreon, which allows me to have those great two guys working on it full time, working on it basically month after month. And yeah, still really a small team for a massive project, but this is what you do when you have a passion for something, and no matter what, you keep at it.
No, absolutely true. I think there's a common thread with all of us, that it's all about the passion for the project.
Mm-hmm.
That, as Golden Flame said, it's not really, we didn't go into it thinking to make money, or quit our day job and become a full-time game designer. Like, we've got this project, we love it, we want to make it. As for myself, yes, I'm also a solo developer. A large part of that is that there's not a large number of people in the TI community who know how to even program in assembly language. And the few that do, I've had contention with because they want to write the code. They always want to write the code in a way that is not actually taking advantage of the memory architecture that they were like, no, you don't want to use that. It's slow. It's like, yeah, but that's the way the system works, and it's not that slow. Why are you like trying to apply 6502 or 880, IBM styles to this assembly, which is completely different? So a lot of times I ended up having to just write all the code myself. And then the fact when I went to a expanded memory system, and there was literally no tools whatsoever for it. So I had to write my own approaches to actually build the code and get it into the system. As far as other art stuff, like music, I found a piece of music I loved. I asked the daughter of the composer, because he had passed away, if I could use it, and so I was able to transcribe it, because I'm not a musician.
Nice.
Sound effects I actually built myself, because they're all built in the TI at like 1/60th of a second intervals, and I basically would just jumble things together and see how it sounded and go, nope, I'll tweak it a little bit and do it some more, and eventually got all my sounds created that way. And art, I had borrowed art from various places, but over time I've replaced it with my own. I actually did draw all the graphics in Realms of Antiquity myself, for the most part. I think there was one point where I asked guys for monster graphics, and one guy provided some, but they were all in black and white, so I had to actually change them to color, and then take advantage of the way the color registers worked, so that it actually looked better than the original. I would say, though, consistent art style is important. You don't want like Nintendo graphic looking guys here, and then over here you got stick figures like Ultima style. If you have both of them in the game at once, that's just looks terrible. You definitely want your game to have a aesthetic consistency.
Is the difference between a professional looking game and an amateur one?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there are programs who are all like, oh, you can just cherry pick stuff out and throw it in, and it'll be fine. It's like, that's no, no, it won't. You can do that maybe in a prototype, but you're gonna need, if you want to actually have it feel like something you uniquely created, you want that aesthetic.
You do, though. I will say that, like, if the choice is between making the game and taking, some art, like until I about 2 years back started actually commissioning new art, I had the Ultima 4 upgrade project tiles and Angband tiles and Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup tiles and a couple of my own in here. And I put some work into making them work together. For me, the problem was actually more just that there are so many other projects that have grabbed from these exact same bins that I wanted to look distinctive. But if it had been the choice between using that and just not finishing, I mean, make your game. People will still play it, and especially if it's a passion project. There are games out there on Steam that use the same pile of graphics that I'm currently moving away from, and they're never gonna make $1 million, but if you're lucky, they'll get enough of a following that you'll either make just enough money or just be sufficiently inspired to get what you really want for the next time you go back to the well.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our next question, which is, how do we make our games? In particular, this would refer to the tools that we use to build our, whether with modern game engines or with retro systems. So
I rolled my own. It's a retro looking engine but I can't say it's a retro engine around you and Mark. But it's not like Unity or Game Maker or RPG Maker or anything like that. Most of those didn't exist yet in a really publicly usable form when I first got started. And, the North Star of my game's look was Ultima 5 with improvements. So, I did look when I started at the Nazgul Haxima engine. And at the time, I decided I'd rather just roll my own than put in the effort to learn how somebody else's system worked. Like, that seems to be a fairly common pitfall a lot of the time, actually, to be like, it's work and it's a pain in the ass to sit there and learn how this other system wants you to do things. But if you do take the time to learn it, that might actually save you a lot of time in the long run. Like, I decided to roll my own in part because felt like it would be less frustrating, and I did learn a lot. And I also really didn't want to wind up saying, here's this thing that I want to do, and the engine that I've chosen just doesn't support it at all. To discover that I just can't do like NPC schedules or something. But the amount of time that I spent rolling my own was significantly more than the amount of time that I would have had to spend just learning how to use something that already existed. And the other thing is, when I started my project, I had hoped to turn it kind of into a portfolio piece and maybe use it to get a real job in game dev or something down the road. And so I felt like it would be a plus to be able to show up and say, look at all of the parts of this that I did myself. That never materialized into anything. And once I finish, I am still debating like porting it to Unity or something, in part to teach myself Unity and be able to add that to my resume as well. Also, just to be an engine for possible sequels. The part of the whole theory advantage of writing the whole thing myself was just, okay, once I have the engine done, next time I can just make a couple of improvements and write a new plot and story, and it'll take me way less time. Now that my engine is mostly done, all I can see are all of the places where I want to do complete refactors and redo this whole section. And so I feel like if I do a port, possibly I can take advantage of the fact that I am rewriting it to fix some of the things that bother me at this point. But if I were starting now, I'm not sure what I would go with. On the other hand, I've been learning Electron for the current iteration, and that's a useful thing to have on my resume, even not for game dev. So that's something. At this point, having said how many times it has occurred to me, I would say as advice that I do not recommend making decisions about these kinds of things based on what will look good on a resume or be good for such things. And in general, I'm not even sure I recommend doing things to try to break into the modern game industry, which is becoming less so, but is a pretty toxic and awful place to work in a lot of cases.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of tools do you use? VS Code or Visual Studio or IntelliJ or?
I'm currently using VS Code. I started out writing in a editor called Ultra Edit that years and years and years ago I had bought a license for, but then I wanted something that was more of an IDE, although I don't use any of its direct bug testing stuff because the code is too sprawling. But when I started out, the game was meant to run in a browser. It's entirely JavaScript. and now it is a self-contained application in Electron, which is still Chromium, the Chrome browser, at its heart. But this means that I no longer have to test on Edge and Firefox. And I had long since written off Safari, unfortunately. So that was a huge boon. But as far as like pre-existing development tools, it's VS Code and the web browsers that exist. Anything else that I've needed, I've had to write myself. And there's certainly a lot of places where there probably were, if I had looked a little harder, options that would have saved me some time. But it is what it is.
Yeah. All right, Mark.
Well, Nox Archaeus was written 100% in 6502 assembly. Custom game engine coded in that way, and the reason for that choice was in part because there wasn't actually a choice. There are no game engines that exist for the Apple II that are, something that you can sort of like configure for your own game, kind of like a Unity or something like that. That just doesn't exist. So the engines from the games of yore, those were all proprietary and were not designed in a way that, they could be, really configured into another game by anybody other than the people that made them. And even if they could, they're, of course, copyrighted things and so on. And so, yeah, I mean, it's everybody built their own back in the day. And, that's the state of the Apple II as it exists today. You want to do it, you build your own. So that was one reason, is there really wasn't a choice. Second reason is I really didn't want to do it any other way. In many ways, Nox Archaeus was finishing, to me, a project that had basically been ongoing for me since the late 1980s as a kid, as I think we all did, grew up, playing these games, wanted to make these games, and et cetera. And, I made some attempts at that, as a kid to, try to make something like what I was, seeing on the screen and playing, something, Ultima-like in particular. And, got a fair distance into some game engine programming, was able to, render tile graphics on a screen and have the map moving around the player and, some things like that. But I never came anywhere near to finishing an entire game or even really an entire engine. It was really just more the graphics engine is about as far as I got. So in that sense, when I got back into this and picked up this project again in 2015, it was really me thinking about, okay, where did I leave off way back when, and now leveraging my increased knowledge of computer science in general, and the fact that you can actually find all sorts of books on assembly language on the internet, versus you might be lucky in the 80s and 90s if your local library had any, or one or two. It was very much in my mind a continuation of what I'd been doing before, and of course I was starting over, from byte one as far as writing the code. But I was in my head, I still had the schematic of the graphics engine that I had written way back when, and really was kind of picking up on the design of that and moving forward with it from there. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. That was what was motivating me to do the project. And so, to put some example to it, we're talking about 100% written from scratch in 6502 assembly. I mean, this is like I'm writing the code that's going to flip pixels in video memory to make the letter T on the graphics screen, or the letter A, or, well, the entire character set. I mean, it was all very manually created from, the ground up. And there were times where, I remember one time I did something relating to getting the computer to boot up and pass control from ROM to my bootloader, which was going to load the game code without an operating system. I touched on this earlier before, and the test that I inserted to verify that it had worked correctly was to print the character M to the screen. And when I saw that M print on, I was never happier in my life than when I saw that letter M print on the screen. And so in the early stage, it was all this little stuff, that I had to, really appreciate what was behind seeing very relatively little and unimpressive, results on the screen. But eventually it rolled up into an engine, and seeing tile graphics and moving around, and then we're talking NPC. It all came over the course of 5 years. And then the tool side of it, well, same situation. There were no tools, so at the very beginning, I did it just like Richard Garriott has described many times. For Apple II graphics, he's like, I had a sheet of graph paper, and each square in the graph paper is a pixel, and so I shaded in the pixels that were going to get turned on, and then translated the pixel placements into binary, and then flipped the nibbles, the 4-bit nibbles of each byte of binary, flipped them around, because that's how the video memory and the raster are wired together on the Apple II for various reasons. And then translated the binary to hex, and then ultimately the hex had to get inserted into the right address in video memory to make something appear on screen. And for a given tile, we're talking about 32 bytes of video memory that has to get inserted in the right place, and not necessarily sequentially, like the first 32 bytes, or go 100 bytes in. No, they're scattered all over the place, because that's just how crazy the Apple II video memory is, based on the way Steve Wozniak designed it to save a bunch of chips. It scattered things all over the place. And anyway, but there is a logic to it, and you can build tables and stuff to sort it all out. But that's how I started with it. And then I thought, okay, well, I've got the concept down here. So then I fired up Microsoft Excel, and that became my sheet of graph paper. And put a 1 in the spots on the grid for, basically like I had a tile grid, and put 1s in the cells that I wanted to turn the pixel on, and then used Excel formulas to take those 1 values and do the conversion to binary, flip it, translate it to hex, and basically at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet was a hex dump that represented that tile. And that's what I'd copy and paste into the source code. And it was the game engine's job to get it into the right bytes in video memory to make it appear where I wanted to be. But that's kind of how the tool started to get stood up, was really just using Microsoft Excel, because it was just a quick, dirty way to get it done. And it was a tool I was familiar with, and did a bunch of tools in that way, and just kind of trudged through it to get Nox Archaeus complete. What I'm looking at moving forward is for a sequel, if that happens, and I think that's likely, is to really put some time into the tool chain, throw out the stuff I cobbled together, and write some actual applications, probably in C# or something, that give me a pixel editor and a map editor, and an application for managing items and NPC dialogue, and all those different things. And when I've done that, that will not by any means mean that Nox Archaeus is suddenly a modern game, because I've written all these tools in a modern language. It will still run, any Nox Archaeus sequel will still run on the original Apple II hardware, by developing this tool set in modern languages and modern computers. All that's really doing is it's making it easier to get all of the hex values organized into the buckets that are needed in order to actually get the Apple II to display the game. But at the end of the day, all these modern tools I'm talking about are going to just create a big hex dump, and that hex dump is going to go onto into a binary file that the Apple II understands, and which could be arrived at the old-fashioned way with graph paper and this and that, and etc., without just sitting down at an Apple II, but would take infinitely longer. So it will therefore still be a custom game engine with then a custom rather modern feeling tool set is kind of where I see things going from here.
Out of curiosity, do you use a cross-platform compiler? Like, are you compiling the 6502 code on your Mac or PC and then actually putting it into, like a disk image directly, or are you actually compiling on the actual Apple II hardware?
I started out on the actual Apple II hardware, and I did it that way for probably a couple of months. That which really at that stage was just kind of me figuring things out. And very quickly decided that I needed to get a cross assembler involved, and I ended up choosing one called SBASM, and which runs on Windows. And that's what I used for the bulk of the project. So I was writing the 6502 assembly code in Notepad++ on Windows, and then using that cross assembler to create binary files, and then ultimately use get those onto the Apple II. And that's also something that I'm in future projects going to do is replace that cross assembler. The choice I made sort of made sense at the time, but as I saw the project evolve, I can see that there's better options. So I've really got a lot of work on the build process and tool chain ahead of me for future projects. And my hope is to end up on the build process, to end up in a position where it's cross-platform and can be run on Mac, Windows, or possibly even Linux. Right now, it's very much tied down to Windows only, to the annoyance of some of my teammates. So
I know the feeling.
So going to get that cleaned up, because the more teammates I can have that are willing to run the build process on their local computer, even if they're not programmers, then that's more work that they can do and test the results of, that I don't have to get in the middle of that workflow. So looking for those efficiency points.
All right.
Yeah, it's always so inspiring listening to you guys writing, hardware code for those platforms and shuffling bits around. In my case, Call of Sergnar is a bit too modern for me to try to attempt something like that. So my choice was Unity. It's all there, and it's also just one guy trying to produce this massive game, and it's also, I need to take into consideration porting, supporting multiple platforms, and Unity does that out of the box nearly without any major effort on your part, apart from input schemes, stuff like that. So how I do my game is it's low poly 3D. I model everything in Blender. It's pixelated textures. The textures are very much photographic textures, which I try to take myself as much as I can. Go out with the camera and take those pieces and assemble them together. This way I try to cover myself not being a very great graphics artist. I can do UI, I can assemble things, I have some sense of aesthetics, but yeah, trying to draw stuff by hand, it's not my forte. So this is what I'm doing, and it's also why I chose to have actual people dressed in medieval garb take those photos and use them as characters in the game. Of course, that brings its own set of challenges. You know, you need to set up a green screen, lights. You have, since the game is not the 90s anymore, it needs to have a bit more frames of animation. So yeah, it's quite complicated. I need to take those, each of the characters, at least those who appear in combat, I need to take those photos from 80 different sides. They need to rotate and repeat each animation, each move, and take those stills and then assemble them into an animation, put it in the engine, and like that. Yeah. So yeah, modern platform is definitely something that I needed to do because writing a custom engine would be an overkill in my case.
It sounds like you've got a lot you need to do already. You might as well.
It's a huge game, but yeah, you know, you need to keep doing it.
Yeah, I think we could probably safely say that regardless of whether you're retro or modern, you're not gonna have less work.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get away a bit I don't have to be such an expert modeling stuff because it's low poly. I just slap a couple of faces and do pretty textures on top and I'm done. But other than that, it's still as much work as if you were trying to make a modern game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's me.
So let's see. For myself, I gave up trying to compile on hardware a long time ago because it takes freaking forever and it would never, ever work with turnaround. And I probably would have destroyed my floppy drive in short order. As is, they're a little whingy. You know, just burning discs for the collector's editions. Plus, finding floppy disks was impossible. I actually salvaged a collection recently from some people, and they're like, "Oh, they've been safe out in our outdoor shed for 10 years," and I'm like, "Yeah, they're
in the hot
Safe.
sun."
Yeah,
They're safe. They just don't work.
Exactly. They make great wallpaper. Just staple them to your wall, and you have a wall of floppy disks. So I actually started back with the TI when I was in school. I downloaded an emulator with Classic 99, which is actually what drives Realms of Antiquity for Windows. And the creator of it, Mike Brent, is a brilliant engine. And he is, not only did he have pretty much a perfect rendition of the TI, he actually has hinted that he could totally make it also do ColecoVision too. It's just he can't because of licensing it. So... and so that emulator let me write code, and then I could like turn on fast mode and compile stuff way fast. But then I even found a better tool, which was a cross assembler called A99, and it was actually written for the Amiga and ported over to Windows sometime in the late 90s. So I've been using that pretty extensively, and then I started writing my own tool set in C# with Visual Studio, and I would just write tools to, hey, take this file and convert it from object code to actual binary code, and then I'll then copy these binary files into the TI files, because one of the advantages with the approach that Texas Instruments did is that their file system is compatible with Windows. It can the emulator can literally read a file like it's a TI file. There's a couple differences with like what carriage return character they use, whatnot. But other than that, it's fully compatible, so I don't have to mess with disk images, which is really nice because disk images are. So by doing that, I was able to actually do a lot of my stuff cross-assemble style and essentially just copy binary data directly into files that then could just be run instantly. My turnaround time for like, oh, I got to fix this, boom, like 2 minutes, and I'm running a fix. So. That really helped a lot. And Excel, definitely a useful tool. Most people don't even know it has conversion from decimal to hexadecimal functions.
Oh.
So, and I actually used that pretty extensively at first for a lot of graphics. the same way that you did, ones and zeros, and then have it just add them all up and then convert them. It's really easy.
Exactly.
But eventually, I actually did write. Now, I wanted to actually ask you about this, Mark. Map editing. I actually wrote map editors on the TI itself, because that way I could actually see and plop down tiles in different places and save the results. I could have probably, in fact, if I was doing it again, I probably would write a modern tool to do all of that instead. But I was curious if you wrote a modern tool or if you just literally directly edited map files to create all the maps for your city, towns.
Yeah, actually, I did that in Excel as well, and basically just got each cell is a tile, and put in the tile ID into the cell, 0 through FF, and I would then change the color of the cell in Excel to be like green if it was grass or blue if it was water, which meant absolutely nothing, in terms of the hex that got produced at the end, but it just visually, enabled me to kind of like see a map amidst these hex values. Pretty effectively, actually. And it reminded me a lot of like when you peer at a gem in Ultima, you get kind of this, blocky, bigature, map thing going on. And that's kind of like what my maps visually looked like in Excel. And so I could totally see, the shape of stuff and the terrain ish, and then I did a lot of copy and pasting, especially for sequences that it would be like, okay, well, I've got tall mountains and medium mountains and small mountains, and I'd maybe have them in a little bit of a configuration, and so sometimes I would copy and paste blocks like that, not so much to use the exact mountain pattern every single time, but just because it's like, okay, well, way on the other side of the spreadsheet, I'm going to create some mountains. Let me copy and paste some mountains over so I've got all the tile IDs to work with, because I never memorized them. At least not most of them. And I just sit there, copy paste to create my mountains and stuff like that. And then just like with the pixel editor, it was just a bunch of formulas that would take. In this case, actually, I'm putting the hex values directly into the map cells, and it was just basically a huge pile of concatenate functions that was grabbing all of those hex values from the map and ultimately rolling them together into hex strings in the format that the cross assembler would understand, and then boom, copy, paste, and every time I changed the map, I'd have to do that, copy, paste, into the source, and definitely, no doubt, more tedious than a proper map editor in a modern tool, and possibly an argument could be made that a tool written on the original hardware like you did, Adam, would be faster as well. And did you? Well, what did you say? Did you say you think it is or isn't?
It's not, because what happens is I have to individually, like I have a blank map, and I have to go in and square by square plot one at a time, because it can't do like mass copies or big spills, or I think I did one thing where fill the current screen with one character, just so I could quickly like fill it all with rock and then plot tunnels afterward. Actually, I did this one step. I did a lot of my maps, if not all of them, on 10 square per inch graph paper, which is extremely uncommon these days to find.
Finding it, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So I would actually hand draw with pencil, and sometimes use colored pencils if I was feeling ambitious. And I would do up a basic map, and then that's actually, I ended up transcribing a lot of that into the computer directly later. That was actually the most time-consuming part of when I was building up Realms of Antiquities content. Was, man, the maps are taking forever. And it doesn't help I can't do like I have a lot of objects. I had two of it, like two different grass tiles, because I wanted the mix and match to make it look less ordered, more chaotic, which looks great on screen, but it's a pain to do, and it also means run length encoding was impossible, because it wouldn't actually get any value out of trying to compress the map. So all the maps are uncompressed. So on that note, I don't know, with Nox Archaeus, did you have to do any kind of compression as well, or is it all straight up raw?
The big maps, 256 by 256 maps for the overworld, and then there's 5 of them like that for the underworld. Those I ran through a ZX7 compressor. That on the PC side, rolled it up with ZX7 EXE, and then one of my teammates wrote a ZX7 unpacker in 6502 assembly, which was a pretty neat trick, and that's how we got the data out. The smaller maps, like for towns and castles, those I left uncompressed, basically just because it would have taken more work to position the compression workflow on that, and it was the sort of thing where I was like, okay, well, I'm not sure that that's actually going to be necessary in order to like hit our disk space targets. So I basically took a gamble, and at the risk of having to go back and do it later, and it turned out the gamble paid off. We fit into the 8 floppy disk sides and didn't have to do the compression on the small maps.
Well, that's good.
Also, we do the compression on NPC dialogue. That also runs through ZX7, all of the text for the dialogue.
Oh, I'll have to look into ZX7. I wrote my own compression technique. I essentially took all of the text in game and then calculated all of the common 2 and 3 letter character combinations, and then used like the top half of the ASCII table as compression, as shortcut compressions. And so it ended up 20 to 40% compression, the text. So
that's pretty good. I think that ZX7 on text comes out. I think it varies, but I think the max that I ever saw was 30%. Low end probably 20. So if you're getting 20 to 40, you might be better off with what you were doing on the text, at least. But
yeah. Okay.
It's funny.
Go ahead.
Just I wanted to. When Mark was talking about the map editing, making the maps in Excel and having Excel color it so that it could be more easily visually looked at, it's just, I find that a little funny because I kind of did that backwards. The first thing I wrote for my game was the map editor. I wrote it 3 times because I threw out my first 2. But I wrote it so that it would directly use the same code objects that I use in the actual game. So a significant amount of that map editor code is in the actual game engine because it was the classes and such for the map objects.
sure.
But I wrote it in JavaScript on the browser because that's what the game was. And so, all of the code, I wanted to be able to reuse a lot of it. The browser can't save to disk. It's not allowed. So the output that it generates is I hit save and it pops up another window and writes JavaScript code, which I then copy paste into my actual code base. And so since I had to figure out, okay, what is the code structure going to look like? What do the objects look like? The terrain level for my maps, I have terrain and then features and then NPCs. The features are objects or things that you might be able to interact with, tables and chairs and doors. So with the terrain level, I create this array where each tile is 2 characters so that I can look at the code for the map and it's mostly readable. I can see, okay, 2... yeah, I can look at the code and 2 carrots is a mountain. 2 uppercase W's is ocean water. 1 uppercase and 1 lowercase is the medium depth water. 2 lowercase, and so I can look just straight at the code and do occasional minor little, I want to turn this grass into road or something. I can do without having to open up the map editor at all because I made that section of the code look like the map. And as I wound up getting more and more bits of terrain, it got less and less useful because it's just like I have run out of 2 character combinations for grass. So now I've got this new thing, and I'm just like, all right, I guess this is B asterisk. I don't know, but the stuff that appears the most often is pretty straightforward, and that wound up saving me a lot of time because I can look at the map and just be like, okay, this doesn't line up. I screwed this up, or I can just I want to change this to a mountain or change this mountain to a hill or whatever, and I don't need to go through the editor and do everything. But it just struck me as being like the complete mirror image from your flow. But the fact that I shouldn't say I have no space constraints, but the more I, talk to you two and other people who are doing projects in real old hardware, boy, am I glad I'm not.
No, that's really cool, and that's something else that strikes me as well is that essentially, at the core of your game, inside the code, your maps start to resemble, like the style of D&D 1, where it was all text characters making up the maps. So there's nice irony.
I play a lot of Engband type stuff, so staring at dots and letters for things is something that I'm used to. Yeah.
Sure. That's cool.
Which may serve me well in somebody's upcoming project. We'll see.
All right. On that note, our next question is, how important are contemporary game mechanics and innovations in retro games?
So I'm gonna start with a hot take on this one. I don't think contemporary game mechanics per se are super important in retro game design. But contemporary innovations in game design philosophy and in the user experience are extremely important. If you want somebody who's used to games now to play your game that's retro style, they want the stuff that they remember fondly from the retro stuff, and they have likely not thought about for years the stuff that drove them nuts while they were playing their games back in the 80s. So things like respecting players' time, supporting as many play styles as you can reasonably fit. In this, I'm specifically thinking of things like supporting an easy or story mode, but also, like, if possible, allow for pacifist runs or Iron Man or whatever, avoiding problematic tropes, adding accessibility, avoiding unannounced unwinnable states. God damn it, Sierra. Those things, I think, are very important. There's also a lot of things that I think are generally much better practices, but that you can go back on them if it's a deliberate choice for the kind of game you want to make. For instance, I think it's great to have an inventory system that isn't awful to deal with, unless juggling inventory is something that you specifically want to have be part of your game. Making saving easy and frequent so you can leave the game whenever you need to, or just generally not lose progress, unless part of the game is specifically, I want you to have to do these things, or there's something, like Undertale has save points, and at one point, spoiler, it's an old game at this point, at one point one of the save points attacks you, because it wasn't actually a save point. That's cute. You can't do that if you don't have save points. All right. Journals and mini-maps, unless you're specifically courting the, people that want to write their own notes and make their own maps. Or obviously you just don't have the memory or the UI to do it. Not having crap choices in the game, like, a D&D style feat system where a couple of the feats really suck. And if you take them, you'll regret it. unless it's like an iterative game where developing mastery over it and finding and learning how to avoid those trap choices is part of what you want to do. There's a lot of things. Oh, the other one that I think is actually really important, allowing the player to see themselves in the protagonist of the RPG, unless you're writing a story where there's a specific person that is the player. All these things are things that I think if you don't have a reason to not do them, you should do them, but they are on the list of things that if you are deliberate and making a conscious choice about it and kind of know what you're doing with it, then you can not do some of these modern things because you have a plan. But there's a lot of stuff now that I think, I don't think that any retro game, even if you're making like a point and click adventure game now, making one where an action that you take an hour into the game can lock you out of winning, but it doesn't tell you that, and there's 40 hours of gameplay left. No one should have done that. No one should do it now.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Infocom text adventure. That thing, it's like, I wouldn't even play it because it's so filled with that kind of thing. And that was the trope at the time, and everyone at the time praised it. And now I don't think anyone would ever play that. It would be like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for that one in specific. I did really like that one. Some of the traps, you did actually get a second chance. But other ones, if you get sent back to your own brain a second time, you're done. But like one of the Sierra games, like there's one of the space quests, I think you have to negotiate with somebody to buy something or another. I don't know. I didn't actually play it. I just have seen it on the list of things not to do. And you go and you talk to this merchant and he says, I will sell you this thing. And if you say, okay, and you buy it, then you can no longer win. But if you negotiate with him enough, then he says, okay, I'll give you this, and I'll throw in this jetpack. And you need the jetpack to win. But once you're done talking to the merchant, he's out of the game and leaves.
Wow.
And then you just go until you get to the point where you're like, I can't figure out how to solve this puzzle because I've never seen the item that would let me solve it. Because the game never even gave you the hint that the item existed.
Yeah, things like that. They just don't belong. They didn't belong in games then, and they don't
Precisely.
belong in games now. I mean, some things like, for example, Ultima 3. We all know Ultima 3. We know that the game expects you to spend like 100 hours grinding, killing monsters, getting gold to raise attributes before you're even allowed to finish the game. And like that might not be as bad, but it's still kind of like nobody wants to play that game. Like,
yeah. Like that's in respecting the player's time is on my list, and that's very much the kind of thing that I have in mind for that. Like some people, in some games, grinding just is this kind of flow state. I can sit there and grind the dungeons of Persona 4 for hours, unless it's one of the ones where the music is awful. But yeah, you don't need to, and there's an extent to which there's a class of games where it would feel a little weird if you couldn't, but you shouldn't have to. I do think that if you're a level-based RPG, that you should try to tool things so that if they take a relatively direct path through your plot, they shouldn't get to a boss that they can't handle because they haven't done a whole bunch of side quests, or worse, haven't just like side quests. At least you feel like you're making progress, you're accomplishing something. Like worse is you haven't spent 3 hours, 4 hours, 10 hours wandering around the forest waiting for random encounters just to get enough XP to handle the next thing.
Yeah,
don't do it anymore. Don't do it anymore.
For a future question, actually, we'll get to. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. Are you done?
I'm done now.
All right.
Please
Mark.
move on to Mark.
Well, the first thing I want to say is I agree with everything that Golden Flame said. I mean, that really just spot on, nails it. And, definitely, I had those things in mind with Noxercast, and we did things like, a pop-up menu or pop-up window-driven menu system for things like inventory. You're not, pressing H to hand item B, which is dagger, to player 4 to no, no one's going to want to do that anymore. So we did things like that. We have a quest log and in NPC dialogue. This isn't a mouse-driven game because that's part of its retroness, but we capitalize the key words in the dialogue. If you're supposed to ask the NPC about sword is capitalized. We're not playing guess the noun anymore. So we did stuff like that. And what I actually like to do with my response here is take a little bit, since Golden Flame covered so much really great stuff there. I want to take a little bit of a no, it was great, and I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into okay. In the developer's chair, what are some of the trade-off kind of decisions between old school feel and applying modern sensibilities in the way Golden Flame described with respect to the audience that's going to be playing, even people who enjoyed playing CRPGs in the 80s and 90s. They look at them through rose-colored glasses a lot of times, and they may like the idea of it, but not actually want to experience exactly what it was like, and that creates a lot of trade-off decisions. And so I thought of an example. So I want to take our listeners and you guys into a dive into one of those situations that I found, which probably resembles, I'm guessing, the kinds of trade-off decisions that you guys have made as well. And that has to do with a particular town in Noxercast, this Nairwood, for anyone who's played the game. And the way I designed the town was it had it's kind of like a forest town, and there's some typical town stuff. There's an inn and an armory, and all along a road, and nothing unusual there. And then like half three quarters of the map is basically a big thick forest, and there's a couple of things in the forest on like the other side of the map. I think there's like a cemetery, and then there's a small building like somebody's house, and there's like a trainer that hangs out there, and the cemetery caretaker tells you some stuff. And so the hidden things aren't like single tile hidden things. They're, a little bit bigger than that, but nonetheless small relative to, you got all of this forest and half to three quarters of the size of this town map. And the way I was looking at it is, well, okay, so the puzzle here for the player is, don't just, visit the inn and the armory, the obvious stuff, and head out, the door. Go explore that forest and find these other things, etc. And so one of my teammates was playtesting the game after it was content complete, and she happened to be a professional game developer in the 90s and the 2000s. So had that, sort of, experience developing retro games, and then also the modern sensibility, stuff that came from the later era game development. And, she gave me feedback on that town and basically said, nobody wants to do a grid by grid search anymore, to go find this stuff. Whereas, or I guess the other thing I wanted to loop in here was just kind of like commenting on the games of old were limited on the kinds of game mechanics that they could have, and a lot of times that resulted in the development of game mechanic where it's almost like wasting the player's time became a game mechanic in a variety of different ways, because there was just like only so much that you could do, or at least that had been conceived of on those platforms. And so there was a lot of that kind of thing that went on, and including grid by grid searches. It was just that was just a thing. Like the town you mentioned, Ultima 3, the town U in Ultima 3 was kind of like that. You know, it was this big forest town, and there was some stuff hidden in it. And going and doing a grid by grid search of you, we didn't really think of anything of it at the time. That was just how games were done. And so I think that was the trap I fell into of why I thought that was okay for this Nox Archaeus, town design. But then fortunately, my teammate who kind of served as a project advisor, given her experience, pointed out, is like, oh, no, this is not respecting, the player's time, a modern sensibility. And so with the way we ended up sort of compromising that out, because it's like, well, I wanted the old school feel and how far to go with that. And so the compromise in there was to create a couple of paths into that forest off of like the main road in the town, but then have them abruptly end, and then a little bit further down in the forest have them pick up again. So there's like this breadcrumb trail that gets the player thinking, well, is there something there? And maybe pick up on some more those breadcrumbs. And in the end, I think it worked out, because none of the feedback from any of the testers that looked at the game after that change, or the production release players, nobody ever made any comments about that, saying, hey, that's just crazy what you did there. So it seemed to work out, and I thought I would share that as kind of as an example.
Nice. Yeah, I had a similar experience with near the end game in Realms of Antiquity. There's a maze that is invisible walls. You can't tell wall from corridor, and it gives you no hints. And every single tester that reached that area said, holy crap, this is so... I can't tell if I'm moving because it makes no sound when I move. It's like, I can't... Like, this is so freaking hard. I'm like, all right, I'll put a couple blank regular corridors in there just so you can kind of get a sense of movement.
Get your bearings a little bit. Yeah, you went all Bard's Tale on them there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you guys really covered it all. I hope to have more similar stories and lessons once I finish the game. But yeah, it's what you all said. Old design is not necessarily bad design, but you need to apply modern quality of life stuff to it, and you might be okay. And if you want to do something, retro, stick with it, but make it so it's accessible, and ditch those what do you call them, quest markers if you can. But older games have had limited graphics, which I guess made them easier to navigate than modern ones, because today it's all about detail and realism, and I guess you need those quest markers to find your way among all that trash, so this is something I'm trying to find a middle ground in my game. I have a self-annotating quest journal, but you still need to read. It's not very open world. I mean, you still will be able to travel in many ways, but you'll still guide it a bit railroaded. So I don't think those. I think a journal will be enough, even though some, the joy of discovery is something on your own. Solving something on your own I think it still outweighs major the just being guided and just coming from point A to point B. It's not that rewarding, in my opinion.
Absolutely. It's I think the CRPG Addict said once that he'll use Excel and he'll map 3D dungeons because they have a concise layout he can track, but he will not do tile-based games. He will not try to make maps. He and I don't blame him. Like, because
I agree.
I mean, even with games like Nox Archaeus, Realms of Antiquity, and even Ultima, like drawing maps is a pain in the butt.
I would do sketches, really kind of broad sort of sketches to kind of orient things. with like the Ultimate games, I found that kind of worked kind of well, and I sort of kept that in mind with Nox Archaeus map design as well. Thinking that it's like, yeah, this stuff is just really tough to map, but at the same time, I wanted to make this, the underworld, this maze-like place. So what I tried to do was leave little clues, little landmarks, that would maybe help people keep their bearings, like, strategic placement of patches of mushrooms or something,
Hmm.
In the end, I don't know how well it works. It may have helped some, but I know there were still plenty of people that were getting lost in my underworld. So,
And you mentioned the peering at gems in Ultima earlier. That was one thing that I did where I'm just like, yeah, okay, I don't have a mini map or something, but I'm just going to make it pretty easy to find my equivalent to these gems, and hopefully the player won't be one of those people like I frequently am, that's just like, oh, I've reached the end of the game and I have 643 healing potions because it never felt dire enough to quite use them. But
it happened to me all the time, especially Ultima 5, all these potions. And yeah.
But yeah, if I can get people to use them, then I'm trying to at least be like, all right, yeah, I've got one town where it's like one of the puzzles is one of the buildings has a secret door that has the entrance to the sewers that lets you get into this area you can't otherwise get to. And finding that is one of the puzzles, but the easiest way to solve the puzzle is just walk into the damn town and cast Peer. Oh, look, there it is. If you want to do it by mapping and saying, oh, hey, on the outside, this building has a wall that's 7 tiles long, and on the inside it's only 5 tiles long. Hey, great, you found it. But if you don't want to make the map, there's another way.
That's great. Multiple options. That's great.
Yeah, I wish I could have done a pure gem kind of effect with Realms of Antiquity, but I unfortunately just didn't have the resolution to do it. It doesn't. The best I could do would be a little 4x4 pixel blocks, because it's the only thing that'll work with the color. And that's not really that big of that's like a double size map. And then the colors and tiles, I only have 15 colors, so you may not have very good differentiation in object. So I just ended up going like, no, they'll just have to figure it out. And with the journal, it was kind of the same thing. As like, I really did consider having like a quest journal that told you, hey, you're investigating this stuff. I ended up scrapping it because, one, I would have to store all the text for the journal somewhere, and that's always a memory expense. And then it was also like, well, come on, it's an old school game. Write it down if you don't remember, And that seemed to have worked. Most of the reviewers complimented that, hey, this is an old school game. It doesn't hold your hand. It expects you to actually take notes if you're having trouble remembering. I did have more complaints about it in inventory.
Yeah, there's 2 things that I'm doing. I don't have a journal. I started adding some code to have, like, when certain flags get set, stuff would get added to a journal, and then but I to use that, I would need to go back through all of my, 100 some odd characters worth of dialogue and find all of the spots to add to the journal. And it's still there if I want to go back to it, but the 2 things that I'm doing to try to make that less necessary, one of them is I have an NPC who's a hypnotist, and if you go up and talk to him, he will hypnotize you, and out of your subconscious, you will tell him whatever piece of the main plot line you're currently on. And so he can't help you with side quests. You still need to kind of write that stuff down, but if you lose track, if you put the game down for 6 months and come back, you can go and talk to him and he'll remind you what you're supposed to be doing. But more importantly, one of the things, and this was a real challenge in some places, one of the things that I did was a design decision from the get-go that nothing is ever told to you just once. If you put the game down for a year and pick it back up and just spend the time to walk around Eleusis and talk to everybody, you can reconstruct everything. There is nothing that you're only given and then you can't get again. And that, precluded some options for things, but I really wanted to make sure, since I didn't have an in-game journal, I didn't want somebody who lost their notes or whatever to feel like they needed to start over if they came back.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, most of my NPCs will just repeat the same stuff if you just go back through the tree. It's very rare that you find one where you only get one piece of information once. Usually that'll trigger a quest flag to get you through the next area anyway.
Right.
So, and on the note of contemporary game mechanics versus our old ones, one of the things I've noticed, especially when you look at old CRPGs, is the influence of Dungeons and Dragons on them. Like you look at early Ultimates, they have all 6 of the original ability scores, even though they make no sense whatsoever to have in the game. Like, do you ever use these for anything other than, well, you're this class, so this ability score matters and the rest don't? You know, it was kind of almost silly how often that got applied. And Ultima eventually ditched all but 3 of the ability scores, and then they actually started to matter. They started to make their own system around that. And so I'm kind of glad that happened. But one of the other interesting things from the past, the log. Why do we have a little text screen that is logging every single command you've done? It's because it's a carryover from the 70s when they had no graphic displays and everything was outputted to a printer. So they would have to output everything all the time with the assumption that you may or may not have a graphic. So, but it's just funny to see that carried forward. It's in Ultima, it's in Nox Archaeist, right? That, you know, it's still there. And it's like, early on with the Realms of Antiquity, I was like, I don't need that. Why do I even need that? I'm not going to include a log. Like, why do you need to go back and remember what commands you did before? You know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And yeah, it is hilarious. Like Ultima 3, which had some classes that used int and some classes that used wisdom to power their spell casting, and absolutely not, like, that's great if you've got, like, here's an item that increases your int and here's an item that increases your whiz. But when all of your stats are just go into the underworld and pay money to an arbitrary place to increase an arbitrary stat, there was no difference between them.
Yeah.
Well, other than the puzzle of you had to find the Shrine of Wisdom and find the Shrine of Intelligence. No, I'm not justifying it as being like a particularly good thing, but that was the only thing, was just that slight little puzzle element there.
Yeah, and so that's where I think contemporary game mechanics. I mean, D&D itself has evolved since the early days. I mean, the early OSR, old school style gaming, tended to be really light on rules, or they were based heavily on tactical wargaming, so they had a lot of things from that. And the modern game it actually focuses on characters, and classes should have, you know, lots of paths and special abilities to make each of them unique. In the old days, it's like, you're a fighter, you got strength, you got a better to hit roll. What else do you need? Stop complaining, you know. Whereas nowadays it's like, no, your character has to have like special abilities and be able to do things nobody else can do. So that is something to keep in mind, is that, you know, with CRPGs, we're definitely, tabletop gaming is kind of where it grew out. So it's always good to pay attention to the trends of where tabletop gaming is going as well, because that's also where modern gamers are in terms of thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before we leave the topic of modern sensibility, something occurred to me as we were talking about Ultima 3. There is the modern sensibility of, you know, don't put the player in a position where they need to start over just because they didn't make, you know, the best selections at like the beginning of the game and creating the character. And Ultima 3 stat system seemed almost designed to make the player start over and over and over until they figured out how to build viable characters. Like, okay, so I got to figure out that I need to, if I want to be a wizard, I need to be a fuzzy in order to be able to cast the really good spells. And there's just all these different combinations. Or like you were saying, Golden Flame, you got to use wisdom for this and intelligence for that. And it was just this jigsaw puzzle that you had to find your way through. I just remember creating new characters so many times over in order to figure all that out, which was fun at the time. But
in Ultima 3 specifically, creating a bunch of characters did have the additional advantage that you could pile all of the food from the characters you were abandoning onto the new ones, and that was the only way to get through the early game in that game.
Yeah, loot the extra characters, send them back to the end.
Yep.
Yeah, there was a reason you could have up to 20 characters, and they expected you to burn through them and then build your alpha class party after you leveled up a bunch. So
Well, and they had permadeath.
Mm-hmm.
Saving your
drive.
Yes.
Many old RPGs allowed you to basically create multiple characters, then drop them, loot them, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking about the rules, the Dungeons and Dragons, it was similar with the Dark Eye games, the old ones from the 90s. Star Trail, for example.
Of wizardry.
Yeah. The Dark Eye, the rule set was huge. The game itself had, I don't know, hundreds of spells, hundreds of skills. But you only used a couple of those in the game, and if you did not invest in certain characters at the beginning that had that skill, the game could be unwinnable. So it was bad design at the time.
So carrying forward on design, so classic CRPGs were often started with single characters, and then eventually Wizardry Ultima 3 introduced parties. So do you prefer the idea of having a single character or a party for a CRPG? Do you think you can have we know there's even modern CRPGs that are a single character game, so it's not heard of. But do you think the party experience is that much better than the single player experience? And if it is a party experience, there's also the idea of, do you create all of your characters at the start, or do you find them in the course of gameplay?
The answer for me, unsurprisingly, is it depends. Dark Unknown is single character. There's no party. There's a couple of points where someone will join you briefly for something. You can have summons and such to help you in fights that you don't control. This was initially for simplicity. And also because the Dark Unknown started out initially as a more direct prequel to Ultima 1. And it felt, while there's some more modern stuff going on, I liked the fact that, Ultima 1 and 2 were single person, and so I felt like that should be part of the lineage there. I did write as much of my code as possible to be agnostic about whether or not there was a party. As the project dragged on, I will confess that there is now a significant amount of my code that just takes shortcuts and assumes that the PC variable points at just one dude. Then, someday I hope to go back and clean that up later once I'm done. For sequels, if they happen, yes, I would love to have a party. I think it very much depends on what kind of game you want to make. In my opinion, as a game for me, if you're going to have a party, I would like to recruit them as I go and have there be inter-party banter and conversation and such. That's Baldur's Gate was one of the early classic examples of doing that absolutely right. It happens a little bit in Ultima 7. Not a huge amount, but there's some, you can tell that these people that are joining you are old friends. Shamino and Yolo ribbing each other all the time, everybody making fun of Dupre for drinking. At which point, there I feel like one of the big questions is how many recruitable NPCs should there be? Like, in Baldur's Gate 2, every single recruitable NPC has a side quest that's unique to them and you can only do while they're in the party. And every pair of NPCs has at least some amount of interaction. And there were like a dozen or so that you could add to your party, but there were only 5 slots. And the trade-offs between it's replayable because I can go in and I can just recruit a completely different party and get a very different experience, not only in having a different mechanical build, but also I'm hearing different people's responses to what's happening and to each other. But also the FOMO and the frustration that comes from I've played and finished this entire game, but I still only actually got to experience 70% of it. And even just for myself, I go back and forth on that. I kind of feel like Planescape Torment maybe was in about the right spot. You've got 5 slots in your party, and I think there's 7 recruitables. And one of those recruitables, or 2 of the recruitables, are real easy to completely miss. And so, like, the fact that I never got Vylor to join my party the time I played through, I don't feel like I need to play through the whole thing again just to get him. So, maybe for me, that's about the sweet spot. The other thing, of course, is if I want to have 10 recruitable NPCs, even if you can only have 4 or 5 in your party at a time. I don't know how so many games wound up with 6 as the sweet spot of people in your party, but that does seem to be like a very common thing. But if you've got that, and if part of why you want it is for all of them to banter among each other, the combinatrix of how many different collections of people could be in your party. Basically, you've got to write a lot more dialogue if you're doing that. And it's worth it if you can do it, but it's a lot more work. And I absolutely will not give you the side eye if you decide, like I did for my current project, although hopefully not for the next one, to make that be what I cut to make room and time for something else.
No, that absolutely. I'll have more to say about all this on my turn, but I should give Mark the next go at it.
Thank you. So I think I agree with Golden Flame that it depends, though I definitely have some preferences, probably even strong preferences in some cases. So firstly, actually, before the firstly, I just want to say I'm glad that all of these different approaches exist. I think that they're all fun in their own way. And when it comes to the single player style, I tend not to prefer that with the classic role-playing game genre, the older games, and I do, however, prefer it with more modern first-person, games like Skyrim, for example.
Sure.
It feels right in that environment, and as a practical matter, I'm not really sure how a party would work. I mean, they have in Skyrim, they had like you could get the companion, the helper, the squire, whatever terminology they use, I don't remember, which was controlled by the computer, and that worked. I thought that worked well. Now, if you have that times 4, so you've got 3 helpers, and then you're controlling your main part. Would that work? Maybe some games have tried. I don't know. That's an interesting topic for another time, I suppose, but I thought it worked at least the way that they did it. But if you're not controlling the entire party, If you have a party but you're not controlling the entire party, that would be kind of like a whole different thing as well. And that's definitely, when it comes to a party-based RPG, that's not how I think of a party-based RPG where the computer's controlling everybody but one character. In fact, I would definitely say, I mean, maybe it would work in a Skyrim-like game, but definitely in a classic role-playing game, I would, rather strongly dislike a CRPG that had a party system, but you only got to control one. I just don't think I would like that at all. But talking more on the CRPG side, I tend to prefer the party game versus the single player game. I think because I want to kind of have all the different, or a lot of different player class experiences. Like, I want to have that mage experience, and I want to have that warrior experience and ranger, all those different things, and I get that in a party game. And I suppose that kind of goes against the grain of the role playing of, like, okay, imagining that you are this character that you're controlling, and that's sort of enhanced in the single player game, but that's never really kind of, I guess, really what I've gotten into in games. I approach it more as like, okay, I'm the puppet master controlling each of the different characters, and I'm not really attaching myself to one in particular, and I just want to have all the different experiences. But if I've got to pick with my single character, like, oh, am I going to be a mage or go down a mage path versus a fighter path, then it's like, well, then I got to play the game 3-4 times just to get all of those different experiences, and maybe I want to play the game that many times, maybe I don't, as it relates to the content itself. Now, then, as far as the finding in a party game, finding the characters versus creating them, I definitely do have fun, in the create your party games, the Bard's Tales, the Wizardries, and games where it's done in that, or Wizard's Crown. I had a lot of fun with those games, so definitely can appreciate that. But I think the sweet spot is actually the party game where you find the characters, and I look at it. It's not just a matter of so many of my preferences have to do with, well, how did Ultima 5 do it? And obviously that's a game that did it this way. But I have an actually more objective reasoning for it, which has a lot to do with why I decided to do it in Nox Archaeus. Probably more to do with why I decided to do it in Nox than just simply it's what Ultima 5 did, and that is I'm a firm believer in Sid Meier's inverse pyramid of decision-making principle, where you expose the player to a very limited number of decisions at the start, and then gradually widen the number of decisions that the player is exposed to, allowing them to get the hang of the game and not feel overwhelmed by the game, especially if people are going to, read the manual very quickly or not at all, or, etc. And it does that. If you start out with one character, you've got a lot less decisions to make than if you're creating a whole party. And then just in game, dealing with combat, it's simpler, if you've got one character, and whether you believe in level scaling or not, in terms of like the number of enemy combatants. And I don't like that. I was able to set it up in Nox Archaeus where you still had that limited decision-making effect as it related to combat, because you got one character and you're fighting mobs with only a couple of opponents, not because their levels scaled, but because those particular types of mobs just only appeared in the starter area, and they were just configured they only ever had more than 2 and 3 in a group. So that allowed for that limited decision-making effect to carry through into combat and those other sorts of early game experiences. And then as the game went on, the player of course finds more characters, and they're getting into other areas that have different types of mobs, which have larger group sizes, and so on down the line. So I guess that's my thoughts on it. And again, I'm glad that all styles exist. And if a game is good fundamentally, this characteristic of the party aspect, whichever design decision is made on whether it's single player or party and find versus build, none of that's going to matter to me if the game, in all of its other respects, is fundamentally a good game.
You mentioned the inverse pyramid, and one thing that just immediately made me think of, just to make a quick reference back to previous question, is how easy it is for you've just started this game and now need to make all of your characters to wind up making a trap party that can't complete the game.
Yeah, exactly. It increases that risk by forcing so many decisions on the player so early when they know so much less. Totally, it increases that risk. I agree.
Yeah, so I have played both. I have enjoyed both, and it all comes down to implementation. I mean, usually single party, single player games are usually more action oriented. Since like you mentioned Skyrim and games like modern RPGs, just makes more sense. But if you have more of a multiple enemies and strategic combat, which is, especially if it's turn-based, then it makes much more sense to have multiple members in your party. So it would be no fun having a single character and taking turns at hacking at many enemies, in my opinion. In my game, since it's so heavily story-based, and I went what the game it was inspired by, Betrayal at Krondor, I went through the same decision path, which would be have a complex story, have multiple characters, and having those characters join you and maybe even leave you between chapters. So it's very story dependent, and having such a heavy dependency with the story and events and characters makes it a really enjoyable experience, a narrative experience, in my opinion. You have those characters that can freely interact with each other as the designer intended, and it's not that. Also, if you have those things predetermined, it's also easier to design than if you have some 10 possible characters that could join you at any time, at any point. You would either have really a hard time designing those interactions for all of those characters, especially if there has to be interactions between those characters. Or you could go the simple path and having a shallower experience, I think, by not having all those interactions in place. But if you build the game and the story and the characters pre-built all around it, you have it's like a book, basically, like a novel. It's very enjoyable because everything is much more predicted. Not everybody likes that, of course. People like creating their own characters. Many like them, especially those who like role-playing games. But this is a conscious trade-off that I decided to do, and just stick with it.
I know you said you're not heavily, the combat is not a huge factor in your game, right?
Yeah, it's not. Maybe it became a bit more of a huge factor since the combat redesign, because that made it a bit more fun, and also in turn, I now I'm liking it more. But still, it's just very. It's not the first thing.
So did you decide with your combat, if you have companions, do they make their own decisions in combat, or are you controlling the entire party?
No, you control the entire party. Yeah. You take turns depending on basically, you can surprise the enemy, in which case you start the first with your turns, and then, or the opposite is true, if they surprise you, and then you take turns based on the speed of the character, basically. But you control all of your characters. Yeah, you do have auto combat. You can just let it play through, but you're always better off playing the moves yourself. Yeah.
So for myself, I originally, because Realms of Antiquity was very much inspired by Tunnels of Doom, the old PI dungeon crawler, I wanted to have you have the ability to make a party, and I wanted to make it so if you made a single-player party, you would get access to the hero class, which is essentially the superpowered class, the easy mode class, because they can do everything, which is exactly what Tunnels of Doom did. Is that if you made a hero, your character was much more powerful than regular. So I wanted that, but I also liked. I mean, Baldur's Gate is like one of the best CRPGs where you have companions that you can just have join, and they can be different alignments from you, and they have all the fun little dialogue exchanges. I think there's at least one case where if you have one of them in your party and you meet another one, that they'll actually kill each other or something, or like one will attack the other, and you have to choose between them. But so I like the idea of having companions in game, because aside from the fact that would just be that you could start solo and then gain party members, then I could also do little dialogue tricks, which yes, the matrix of interactions is a tough one. I had to be kind of I couldn't do as many combos as I wanted, and in one case I did one I regretted because it required 3 characters in the party, which would mean that you'd have to pick these exact characters and been and gone to this exact place to get the dialogue that pops up. So it's kind of like that. I should have probably kept it at 2, not 3. But but in the end, I absolutely agree. Well, I think part of the limitation of a single character party is, of course, then your character has to be the everyman. They have to either depending on your game engine, your game mechanics, they either have to become good at everything, or you have to make sure the game is not overbalanced in one direction or another, where nope, you need magic to win. So if you don't make a powerful magic casting character, or you just get everything, it becomes a fairly narrow game mechanics wise. It's a very narrow approach. Whereas with a party in a class system or a skill system, what have you, whatever, where characters can be good at some things and not good at others, then you can have a nice balance effect, and it kind of gives you, the player, much more variety to enjoy. And I absolutely agree that not having control of your characters in combat, we have seen this in Ultima 7, and it does not work. Although there's a lot of reasons that in Ultima 7 it doesn't work, but I don't know too many.
Fire Doom staff.
Just gonna say
Fire Doom staff, and like, why are you dropping your backpack and running away?
the only redeeming thing there with Ultima 7, in my opinion, was the Hoe of Destruction, just because it was so funny.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that was I looked at Ultima 7 just like, I was like, what does that do? It's like if you have like a tactical game, like, Realms of Antiquity, turn-based tactical, 8x8 like a chessboard. So naturally I wanted to have tactical style combat, but if you didn't actually control your characters other than one, what fun is that? Where's the game in that? Then you're like it's just the computer moving it and making all of the tactical decisions for you. Like, then the only real game part there is making sure you pick the right. Like, in retrospect, I would say if you are going to have a game where no, you can't create any characters other than yours, but you can have companions join, you do want a fairly rich set of companions. I only have 1 per class in Realms of Antiquity. Realistically, I should have probably had more than that. Should have probably had like 50% extra, like another 4 or 5 in various classes, just to give you a little bit more variety. Because Baldur's Gate does that. You can get like every single class and every single magic user specialization if you dig around. In fact, I think the only thing you can't find is a straight up magic user with no specialization. If you want one, you have to make your character that. So, let's see. Go ahead.
Oh, I just said that's cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, so final question will be, what advice, which we've been doing this all for the last 2 hours, what advice do you have for other developers or hobbyists thinking about getting into retro game development or retro-like game?
All right. Keep your scope small. That's my starting advice. If you're if you're already doing game development and now you're getting into retro game development, you've already got some experience to make your decisions about this kind of thing. When I got started, I had 2 game ideas and I decided to work on the smaller one. 15 years and a metric ton of feature creep later, I'm still at the almost done stage. If you're just getting started in game development, make something really small. Make a couple of things that are really small. Do a weekend game jam project. Make an all-text adventure with 20 rooms and 5 puzzles. Remake a Colabeth. Then tackle something bigger. Like I said, if what you're doing is just getting into the retro part, ignore that. You've put in your time already. The other main thing that occurred to me to say is find and get involved in communities built around other retro games. We all mostly know each other through each other's Discords and such. A significant number of the people that I've contracted to do in-game art for me, I met on another Discord for another similar, pixel art game. I've gotten all kinds of great advice from y'all specifically and other people in these communities. The amount of support that, for the most part, people in these communities give each other because, anybody who's doing this kind of thing is doing it because they love it and it's a passion thing. And everybody wants to play the games the other people are making. It's like, yes, please, I will support you and give you advice and help because I want you to finish your game because I want to play it. I only haven't played y'all's games yet because, by God, I'm not playing a lot of games at all so that I can try to get stuff done. And also, I'm going to be honest, there's an extent to which I don't want to deliberately or accidentally wind up stealing cool things from Realms of Antiquity or Nox Archaist. It's like, let's not accidentally I got that from there. Shoot.
Yeah, we'll totally call you out on it.
Yeah, it'll happen. But once I'm done, I'll Twitch stream both of them. Yeah. But yeah, that's the main stuff that we talked about a bunch of stuff earlier in our conversation here, particularly in our question about game mechanics and innovation. Keep a lot of that stuff in mind, but yeah, a lot of people who haven't done a project like this before or possibly, don't work in software generally. Because I do know a lot of people that want to make games but aren't, programmers for their day job or something. And now that the tools exist to let you do this, by the end of it, you may find, oh my God, I've learned Lua. But we've got Game Maker, RPG Maker, Exalt, if you want to go to that kind of thing, whatever. A lot of people, and I am absolutely one of them, are really bad at gauging how long something is going to take. Not just a project in general, but a subsystem. I lost an entire month to debugging one stupid edge case when I introduced a light system. That I felt like light was going to take me about a week, and it took me about 3 months. When I decided, all right, screw it, I'm adding NPC schedules, which my initial game blueprint did not include, and then I was like, I'm going to keep it simple this time, and I'll add that to the next one. And then I got to a point where I said, just in case there isn't a next one, I am going to go ahead and do this. And then that required not only developing everyone's schedule, but I had to remake every single town map because now everybody needed a place to sleep. So every town got twice as large. I went into that and just said, I have no idea how much time this is going to add. Turned out to be literally over a year.
Wow.
So that's why I say, if you don't already have some experience in planning out a project at least somewhat like this, start really small. It'll probably grow somewhat, but if you finish it and it winds up being less than you'd wanted, you've still finished something. I haven't yet. So learn from my example. And I will rest for the jury with that.
All right, Mark.
As before, I think Golden Flame made a lot of good points there, and I additionally would suggest make the game that you want to play, and actually maybe did touch on that briefly, but I want to emphasize: make the game that you want to play. Don't worry about audience. If you start worrying about the audience and, what kind of game are people most interested in, this and that and the other thing, I mean, anything can happen. You can get lucky. But that, in my observation, that is a road that leads to an unsustainable project, because in the end, whatever the answer to that question is about the audience usually results in making something that isn't exactly what you're passionate about. And that makes it all the more difficult to sustain the project. And that's really, the name of the game when it comes to game development is simply just sticking with it. That is the hardest thing, because there are highs and there are lows. And then there's the slog in between that is neither of those two things. That's just what it is. So the best foot forward to getting through all that is make the game that you want to play, that you're most passionate about. And in the end, there's some chance, of course, that the audience is going to be there to one degree or another. It might be a lot, it might be a little, but it's probably at least going to be some. Like Golden Flame said, I mean, the very worst case is you have the for your first game, the accomplishment of that you've made something. Then maybe worry about the audience more the second game and so on. But so I want to emphasize that, make the game that you want to play. And then another point is picking the style of game and sticking with that. Now that might get answered in the make the game that you want to play decision, because maybe you're only passionate about tile-based RPGs, but some people may be passionate about various styles, Bard's Tale styles games as well as Ultima style games, or Gold Box style games, and so on. And so there might be multiple kinds of games that would come to mind in the make the game that you want to play. And essentially that scenario is another opportunity to not stick with something because maybe start an Ultima style game, but then are feeling later on more like, okay, but maybe I want to try making a Bard's Tale style game more when I woke up this morning than I did yesterday. And so that can create that opportunity to essentially shift gears and start over, etc. And as hard as it is, I think that's very important is to pick a style and stick with it. And some of this also as well has to do with like, well, the aspiring developer, what is their skill set? And Golden Flame covered some of that as far as, are you already a game developer and trying to get into retro, etc. I'll peel it back a little further and say, well, the decision path I think is different for somebody that is an accomplished programmer versus one that is more on a learning curve on the programming side of it. An accomplished programmer that maybe just hasn't written a game before, I would say, like I said before, pick the style, stick with it, get on with it. If the person is a somebody that's still learning a lot about programming, then I think that in that environment, I would advise give yourself the opportunity to explore for a while first before really locking in the decisions, including on the style of game. Take some time and maybe fiddle around with a tile graphics engine. Take some time and maybe fiddle around with a 3D style Bard's Tale thing if you're so inclined. Because all that's just going to teach you about programming in different ways, and there's a lot of transferability between them. And as you're going through the process of doing that, of learning, those different aspects about programming, then you're also exposing yourself more to those different styles of CRPGs that can better inform your decision about which style to choose. But what I would recommend in that case is give yourself a timeline and say, okay, I'm going to spend basically a year on R&D increasing my programming knowledge, kind of a thing, and then basically commit to, okay, at the end of that year, make the decision. Or if it's more fluid, because how much time do you have to spend on it might vary. Maybe set it by set some milestones in some fashion, like relating to the programming knowledge that that you're acquiring, or even if you have to adjust the date a few times to accommodate life getting in the way of how much time you're spending on it, so be it. But I think the key is don't what I would advise is don't let it be this free flowing endless sort of R&D phase. Set some milestones and get through that, and then and then make those decisions. What's the game that you're passionate about? What's the style? Lock those in, and then buckle in and get ready for, like I said, some highs, some lows, and the slog in between, and just persevere and stick with it. That's my advice.
Get ready for the pain. Yeah, so I agree with both of you. Made great points. The scope is, of course, keep it small. Don't be like me. Do what you're comfortable doing, or if you're not comfortable doing, learn stuff. And once you think you've got the skills, you've got all it takes to make the vision that you have set in your mind to do. Make a plan. Don't just rush into it. And if you ever decide to do something monstrously big like I did, just buckle up and do it. Because once you invest years into it, there is no way out. So choose your project wisely. That would be my suggestion, my advice.
Great all around, honestly. For me, I think one of the things that doesn't come up often is, and this is something I think most people don't realize, computer role-playing games, CRPGs, have always been a niche area. Even when they were popular in the 80s, Origins sold more copies of Wing Commander than they sold all the Ultimas combined. Like, it was never about being popular or making lots of money. The fact Lord British kind of spoils us with his little ascension, and then he's buying castles in Texas, and we all think, gosh, being a game designer is awesome. But it's like there's so much luck and circumstance that led him to where he got, and that's not what you won't have that. Like if you love CRPGs, if you have a passion for them, you make them because you want to make them, and you're not going to worry about, you're not going to be thinking, make it because you want to make it. Don't make it because you think it's what people want, which I think Mark made that point too. So, and I think another thing that hasn't come up is if you're still in the process of working on it, think very carefully before you take money, either like through Patreon or on a Kickstarter campaign. I know there was one Kickstarter, not the one you guys are thinking of, that I contributed to, and the author, his father passed away, and he basically just shut everyone out of his life. And eventually a small group came in and took over to finish the Kickstarter, but they offered refunds to anyone who wanted it at that point, to which I said, yeah, I'll take I wanted his project, not yours. So, and so that worked out. And then I know like a content creator, who worked pre-YouTube. He actually is on YouTube, but he worked on other ones before that have since gone. He was really great, funny. He had a Patreon. He was going along great, and then personal life issues totally interrupted him. And he's years have passed now, and he's kind of starting to try to make a slow crawl back into content generation. And I'm not going to be mad at him if he doesn't. But everyone who was on his Patreon was so angry because, like, we gave you money and you didn't produce anything. And I'm kind of like, with all the pressure and all the work and the slog, the highs, the lows, just don't bring money into it as well. That just makes it so much worse. If you're actually aiming to produce software like a professional company, if that's kind of how you're thinking, okay, but you're running a business now, totally different.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't have the Roll to Ventura perspective here today. Because I think he's those of us who could have been here today, he's the one who would have the most to say about doing this as a business.
We should definitely follow up with that maybe in a future part.
Yeah, definitely should get him to talk about that next time.
Yeah, I think that would be a great subject. Okay, I think though we're past 2 hours, so I think we are out of time. So thank you, gentlemen.
It's been a pleasure.
I think we learned a lot today.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah, this was really good. And I do just want to, since I just brought up Worlds of Antara, which is one of the other projects that we would have liked to have had join us today, but the developer couldn't make it. Also, just a shout out to Scald Against the Black Priory, who had something come up, and he couldn't make it today either. Hopefully they will be with us next time, a future time. There will be future times, we hope. We like doing this. But I did want to make sure that both of those at least got a little bit of a shout out, so they know that we still love them.
Absolutely. From what I can know, I think Scald is he's got his nose to the grindstone in crunch time.
Yeah.
You're getting your game soon, guys.
So for those of us with games that are out, like Adam, for example, where can people find Realms of Antiquity if they're interested in picking up a copy?
Yeah, you can find Realms of Antiquity on Steam in digital format. It's also on itch.io as an alternate, should you have objections to purchasing stuff on Steam. You can also buy the binaries directly through arcadeshopper.com. There is one collector's edition remaining in his store for purchase, and several of the deluxe size cloth mats that were produced for the Kickstarter Deluxe Edition are also still available if you like your tangibles. No plans on doing any reprints of stuff. So once it's gone, it's gone.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have my copy of Realms of Antiquity, in fact, right here up on the wall.
Nice.
Get it while you can, guys. Collector's item. And for Nox Arceus, while I talked a lot about it being an Apple II game before, it is available to play on modern computers as well through Steam, Good Old Games, itch.io, and our website, noxarceus.com. And on our website, you can also still order the collector's edition, which has the cloth map, printed manual, and hand-sealed wax ripped from the Queen, all kinds of feelies in there. So these are not going to be available forever either, but we still have, I think it's like 10 in stock, and then it's going to go into probably a pre-order at that point for some distant time down the road. So check that out if you'd like. And Golden Flame and Rubiton, where can people find your projects to follow along in your continued development?
I have a website that is tapestryofages.com, and it does have a store set up. You cannot pre-order the game yet because, like Adam said, I do not yet want... I want to be a little closer to the actual finish line before I start taking money for that. But there will eventually be a physical copy with feelies and all. I couldn't figure out before we started how to get my camera to not mirror stuff, so that's not very useful. And you can find me, for now at least, on Facebook at Dark Unknown Game. I created that initially years ago to just be a place where every day I would post my progress for the day, and this would keep me honest. It has essentially turned into one of the main places that has a community for things. I am not a fan of Facebook in general, but it's where stuff just kind of organically happened. So there it is. There's a link to that at the tapestryofages.com page. So that's the only thing you really need to remember.
Okay, I'm sure we'll have links in the description. But yeah, just
absolutely.
go to my website, callofsaragnar.com. You can also type callofsarahconnor.com. It will still work. Yeah, I am taking money. I am one of those. I run a Patreon. I accept donations. Mostly all the money goes to all sorts of expenses, like both my audio guys and some go to the hardware, and also costumes and hiring actors, stuff like that. So this is how I roll, because it's a big project. Its demands are quite big. We are currently looking for a publisher. So I would like to go full time with it, but we'll see. Right now, this is doing part time. I need to pay the bills, so I need a job, which all of us do. And this is it. Go to the webpage. You have links to everything to Steam. There's a demo on Steam. I recently got a GOG page. You got wish lists there, so just spread the word. It's all this project needs right now. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Okay. We'll cross our fingers for your publisher hunt.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure talking to you all, and look forward to doing it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Part 2 has been nice. Let's watch for that part 3 in the future.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Sounds good.
Bye, I guess.